A stranger stands before the greatest prophet alive on earth. He speaks calmly. This is the parting between me and you. 3 acts, a boat ripped apart, a child killed, a wall rebuilt for people who deserved nothing. None of it made sense until now. To understand how a man who spoke to God found himself standing before someone who knew more than he did, we need to go back. Back to a sermon, back to a question, back to a dead fish. The Bani Israel had made it. After generations of slavery under Pharaoh, after the plagues, after the sea split open and swallowed their oppressors whole, they were free. Musa, alayhi as-salam, stood before them, their prophet, their leader, the man who had spoken to Allah on the mountain of Tur. He had done what no one else could do. He had brought them out of Egypt. And now, in the aftermath of deliverance, as the people gathered around him, someone in the crowd asked the question, "Who is the most knowledgeable person on earth?" Musa answered without hesitation, "I am." And he was not being arrogant. Think about it. This was a man who had received the Torah directly from Allah. He had witnessed miracles that would have shattered ordinary men. He had stood in the fire of divine speech and survived it. When someone asked him who knew the most, what else was he supposed to say? He did not know of anyone who had been given more knowledge than him. His answer was honest. But Allah's standard is different from ours. Allah did not accept Musa's answer, not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete. Allah revealed to him, "There is a servant of mine at the junction of the 2 seas. He has been given knowledge from me that you have not been given." Imagine hearing those words. You are a prophet of Allah. You speak to the Creator directly. You have led an entire nation out of bondage. And now you are told, somewhere out there by the sea, there is a man who knows things you do not. For Musa, this was not humiliation. It was education. And the way he responded tells you everything about him. He did not question it. He did not resist it. He did not sit down and say, "My knowledge is enough." He said, "How can I find him?" He could have stayed where he was. He was the leader of the Bani Israel, the people who had just been delivered from one of the greatest tyrannies in history. They needed him. They depended on him. And yet, the moment he learned there was knowledge he did not possess, he was ready to leave everything and chase it. That is who Musa was. Allah gave him a sign, the strangest sign. He told Musa to take a salted fish, a dead fish, dried and preserved for the road. And when that fish disappeared, that would be the place where he would find the man. A dead fish, not a star.
Not a burning bush.
Not an angel descending from the sky. A dead, salted fish in a basket. The most ordinary object in the world, and it would become the most extraordinary sign. Because that is how Allah operates. The miraculous is hidden inside the mundane. We think signs should look like signs, but sometimes they look like a fish in a basket. Musa took with him a young man named Yusha ibn Nun, Joshua the son of Nun. He was Musa's loyal companion, quiet, dutiful, a man of great faith who asked no questions. He did not ask where they were going. He did not ask how long it would take. He did not ask why they were carrying a dead fish. He simply said yes and walked beside his prophet. He carried the supplies. He matched Musa's pace. Years later, after Musa's death, Yusha would lead the Bani Israel himself. He would command armies and make decisions that shaped the fate of an entire people. But on this day, he was a young man carrying a fish, following a prophet who was following a sign he did not yet understand. Every great leader begins as a follower. And Yusha's greatest teacher was not the lesson itself. It was watching his own teacher learn. Even in the packing, there is a lesson. Musa did not say, Allah will provide miraculously. He packed food. He took a companion. He planned the route. Faith in Allah does not mean abandoning common sense. It means doing your part and trusting Allah to do His, and so they walked and walked and walked. Musa, alayhi as-salam, made a declaration before he left. I will not give up until I reach the junction of the two seas, even if it takes me ages. When was the last time any of us said that about learning? When was the last time we were willing to walk until our feet ached? Not for money, not for status, but for the privilege of knowing something we did not know before? Musa, a prophet of God, set out on a journey with no destination marked on any map, no timeline, and no guarantee. Only a dead fish and a promise. The terrain was rough. Sun-baked rock and endless stretches of empty land. Musa and Yusha walked for miles and miles, day after day, carrying their provisions. The weight of the journey was not just physical. Musa knew what was waiting for him, or rather he did not. And that was the hardest part. He was walking towards something he had never seen, guided by a sign he had never tested. But the journey itself was part of the lesson. Allah could have brought Khidr to Musa. He could have revealed the meeting place in a vision. But he did not, because the walk was the first test. Knowledge is not given to those who sit and wait for it to come to them. It is given to those who chase it, who endure the heat, the exhaustion, the uncertainty. The walk was the price of admission. Finally, they reached a large rock by the shore where two bodies of water met, Majma al-Bahrain, the junction of the two seas. They sat down to rest. The air was heavy with salt. The sound of the merging currents filled the space. Musa, exhausted, laid down and fell asleep. And while he slept, something extraordinary happened. The fish, the dead, salted, dried fish in their basket, came back to life. It stirred, it moved. And then in a single motion, it slipped out of the basket and into the sea, carving a tunnel through the water as it went. The Quran describes it took its course into the sea, slipping away. Yusha watched it happen. His eyes widened. The water parted around the fish as if it had never been dead at all, life returning to something preserved. A miracle so small that only two people in the history of the world ever witnessed it. And one of them was asleep. This was the sign. But here is what most people miss about what happened next. Yusha forgot. When Musa woke up, Yusha did not mention it. Not out of negligence. Not out of disrespect. He simply forgot. The Quran tells us that Shaitan made him forget. And that forgetting was not a mistake. It was part of the design, because they kept walking. Past the rock, past the junction, further and further from the meeting point. They walked until Musa felt the weight of fatigue pressing down on every muscle.
Bring us our morning meal,
Musa said to Yusha. We have certainly suffered fatigue from this journey. And it was then in that moment of hunger and exhaustion that Yusha remembered. His face changed. The realization hit him like a wave. Did you see when we stopped at the rock? He said. Indeed, I forgot the fish. And no one made me forget to mention it except Shaitan. It made its way into the sea amazingly. He expected disappointment. A reprimand. After all, they had walked past the sign. They had overshot the one place they were supposed to stop. But Musa did not waste a single breath on blame. He said one thing.
That is what we were seeking.
And he turned around immediately. How many of us, when we realize we have gone too far in the wrong direction, refuse to turn around? Stubbornness. The unwillingness to admit we passed the right exit. Musa had none of that. He did not sigh about the wasted steps. He did not ask why Yusha had not spoken sooner. He simply turned and retraced his path, because every step forward and backward was part of the plan. If the fish had been noticed immediately, the fatigue would not have happened. The question about breakfast would not have been asked. The moment of remembering would not have landed the way it did. Allah's design is in every footprint, and there at the rock they found him. A man sitting by the shore wrapped in a green garment. In some narrations, the cloth was spread on the surface of the water itself. The air around him was still. Everything about him radiated calm. This was Khidr, alayhi as-salam, the most mysterious figure in the entire Quran. A servant whom Allah had taught knowledge directly, ilm ladunni, knowledge from the divine, not knowledge from study, not knowledge from experience, knowledge placed directly by Allah into a human heart. We had taught him knowledge from us, the Quran says. Musa greeted him with the greeting of peace, and Khidr's response was startling.
Is there peace in your land?
He already knew where Musa came from. He already knew why he was here. The one who was sought had been expecting the seeker. That is not coincidence. That is divine choreography. Allah had arranged this meeting down to the last footstep, down to the last ripple in the water. Musa wasted no time. He asked the question he had traveled so far to ask, "May I follow you so that you teach me from what you have been taught of sound judgment?" Khidr's answer was immediate and blunt.
Indeed, you will never be able to have patience with me.
"Not it will be difficult, not. You might struggle," he said. "You will never be able." He already knew the outcome. He had already seen the future of this journey. And yet he agreed to take Musa along. Because the lesson was not for Khidr. It was not even just for Musa. It was for every single person who would ever open Surah Al-Kahf and read these verses. Every Muslim who reads this story every Friday. The failure of patience is itself the lesson. Khidr knew this, and so he continued.
And how can you have patience about a thing you have no knowledge of?
This was not a taunt. It was a key. Khidr was telling Musa and telling us the entire thesis of the story in one sentence. You cannot be patient about what you do not understand. And you do not understand what you do not understand. That is the nature of human limitation. Musa, ever determined, answered, "You will find me, if Allah wills, patient, and I will not disobey you in any order." Khidr accepted, but with one condition, one absolute, non-negotiable condition.
Then if you follow me, do not ask me about anything until I mention it to you.
No questions, no protests, no reactions, no matter what he saw, for a man whose entire identity was built on speaking truth to power. A man who had stood before Pharaoh himself and said, "Let my people go." Silence was the hardest possible sacrifice. Musa was being asked to shut down his greatest strength, his voice, his sense of justice, his instinct to speak. He could have said, "I am a messenger of Allah. I will not be silenced when I see wrong." And he would have been right. But he did not. He accepted. He trusted Allah's plan more than he trusted his own instincts. And so they set off together. Musa had no idea what he was about to witness. They came to a river. Poor fishermen were loading their boats along the bank, men with calloused hands and sun-worn faces. Their vessel was small, patched in places, but it was theirs. It was their livelihood. Every catch fed a family. Every trip out to sea was the difference between eating and going hungry. When they saw Khidr, their faces lit up. "Come aboard," they called out, waving eagerly. No charge, no payment. They adjusted their nets to make room. One of them insisted on sharing his water. These were not wealthy men. They barely had enough for themselves. And yet they gave freely, without being asked, without expecting a thing in return. Remember their kindness. Hold it in your mind, because what happens next will test everything you think you know about justice. The boat was gliding across calm water. The breeze was gentle, the sky was clear. For a brief moment there was peace. Musa sat quietly, watching the shoreline recede, feeling the rhythm of the waves beneath the hull. And then, without a word, Khidr reached for a tool and tore a plank from the bottom of the boat. Water began seeping in. The fishermen scrambled. Their faces, the same faces that had been smiling moments ago, were now twisted with alarm. The boat that was their only means of survival was being destroyed by the very man they had welcomed aboard. Musa could not contain himself. "Have you made a hole in it to drown its people?" "You have certainly done a grave thing." His voice was sharp. His eyes were wide. And in that moment, every promise he had made shattered against the rocks of his own conscience. He had sworn to stay silent. He had promised patience. And the very first test broke him. But understand this, Musa's objection was not impatience. It was justice crying out. He had just watched someone repay generosity with destruction. These fishermen had given everything they could, and now their boat was sinking. Every bone in Musa's body screamed, "This is wrong." And he was right to feel that way, because he could only see what was in front of him. He could not see what Khidr saw. He could not see the tyrant king downstream, seizing every good ship by force. He could not see that a damaged boat, a worthless one, a boat with a hole, was the only kind the tyrant would ignore. The damage was not destruction. It was salvation. But Musa did not know that yet. Khidr turned to him. His voice was calm, almost gentle.
Did I not tell you that you would never be able to have patience with me?
The words landed like stone. Musa caught himself. He remembered the pact. The shame of breaking it was immediate.
Do not blame me for what I forgot.
He said quickly, "And do not be hard on me." Khidr said nothing more. He simply continued. But here is the question nobody asks. Why did Khidr forgive him? He could have ended the journey right there. "I told you. Goodbye." But he did not. He gave Musa another chance. Was it patience? Mercy? Or was it because Khidr knew that the boat was just the warm-up, and the real test had not yet begun? They disembarked and continued on foot. Musa swallowed his questions. He buried his protest beneath layers of self-discipline. He told himself, never again, no matter what. But the worst was yet to come. They entered a town. Children were playing in the open, running, laughing, chasing each other in the dust. The air was warm. The scene was ordinary. The kind of scene you would pass without thinking twice. Khidr walked toward one of the children, a young boy playing with his friends. And without warning, without explanation, without provocation, without a single word, Khidr took the boy's life. There was no build-up, no preparation the viewer can steel themselves against. Just an act so sudden, so incomprehensible, so terrifying that the world seemed to stop. Musa erupted. "Have you killed an innocent soul who killed no one? You have certainly done a deplorable thing." His voice shook. His outrage was total. A boat is property. Property can be rebuilt. But a child, an innocent child who had done nothing wrong, this is the hardest moment in the entire story. Not just for Musa, for us, for every person who hears these words. Because the viewer's instinct is the same as Musa's. This is monstrous. This is wrong. And we are supposed to stay patient? That is exactly the point. Allah did not choose a comfortable test. He chose the most uncomfortable test possible. Property first, then human life. Each escalation designed to push harder, deeper, past every boundary. Because the lesson is not just about patience. It is about trusting Allah when everything inside you, every moral instinct, every fiber of compassion screams that this is injustice. And Musa's outrage, it was not a flaw. It was the reaction of a righteous man. He failed the test because he was too good a person to pass it. What would any of us have done if we watched a man kill a child in front of us and we had promised to stay quiet? Would we keep silent? Musa's failure is his greatest moral moment in this entire story. Khidr's response was identical to the first time. Same words. Same calm. Did I not tell you that you would never be able to have patience with me? But this time, the words hit differently. Musa knew he had used 2 chances. There was only one left, and he scrambled for it. If I ask you about anything after this, then do not keep me as a companion. You have received sufficient excuse from me. He had given himself his own ultimatum. One more question, one more protest, and it was over. Notice the escalation. First, property. Then, life. Khidr was not choosing these tests randomly. Each one was harder than the last. Each one pushed Musa further past his breaking point. And each time, Khidr repeated the same words. Did I not tell you? The repetition was not cruelty. It was a mirror. Khidr was showing Musa his own limitations, not to mock him, but to teach him. The repetition was the pedagogy. One more chance. Just one. They kept walking. They arrived at a town surrounded by walls, hungry, their feet dusty from the road. They had not eaten since the boat. And so they did the simplest, most human thing. They asked the people of the town for food. Door after door closed in their faces. The smell of cooking bread drifted through the stone walls, evidence of abundance kept behind locked gates. One man looked at them and turned away without speaking. A woman shook her head from behind a half-shut door. A merchant waved them off like beggars. Not a single person in the entire town offered them so much as a cup of water. This was not violence. There were no threats, no swords, no chains. It was the smallest cruelty, the cruelty of indifference. Just turned backs and silence. And yet it set up the greatest irony in the entire story, because Khidr was about to give his labor for free to the very people who had refused to give him bread. They found a wall at the edge of the town, on the verge of collapse. Stones were loose. The mortar had crumbled. It leaned dangerously. And Khidr, without being asked by anyone, without a word of negotiation, bent down and began to rebuild it, stone by stone, with his bare hands. No help. He lifted the rocks, set them in place, pressed the mortar back together. Sweat dripped from his brow. His hands scraped against the rough surface, and he worked in silence. For people who had refused to feed him, Musa watched, his jaw tightened. He had held his tongue through 2 acts that defied every instinct in his body. A boat ripped apart, a child killed. He had swallowed his outrage, choked on his own sense of justice, and stayed quiet. But this small, quiet, confusing act was what broke him. If you wished, Musa said, you could have taken payment for it. It was the mildest thing he had said all journey, not an accusation, not an outburst, just an observation, a reasonable one. These people refused you food. Why are you working for them for free? But it was a question, and the condition had been absolute, no questions. The smallest violation carries the heaviest consequence. Khidr stopped. He straightened up. He turned to Musa, and he spoke the words Musa had been dreading from the moment this journey began.
This is the parting between me and you.
Not anger, not disappointment, not "I told you so," just a calm, factual statement spoken the way a teacher speaks when the lesson is over. The journey had reached its end. 3 tests, 3 reactions, 3 chances, and all 3 spent. But then Kathir said something that transformed the ending into a gift.
Now I will inform you of the interpretation of that which you could not have patience with.
Even the farewell was an act of teaching. Even the parting was mercy. Khidr's final act was not punishment. It was explanation. And one by one he peeled back the veil. As for the ship, it belonged to poor people who worked at sea. I intended to damage it because behind them was a king who seized every good ship by force. The fishermen. The kind, generous fishermen who had offered free passage. Downstream from where they sailed, a tyrant was confiscating every seaworthy vessel. Every undamaged boat was taken. Families were left with nothing but a boat with a hole in it, a damaged boat. The tyrant would pass it by. It was worthless to him. And so the fishermen kept their livelihood. The damage that looked like destruction was the very thing that saved them. As for the boy, his parents were believers, and we feared he would burden them with transgression and disbelief. So we intended that their Lord would substitute for them one better than him in purity and closer in mercy. The boy would have grown up to drag his believing parents into disbelief, not through violence, through love. Through the bond between parent and child, they would have followed him. They would have compromised their faith for him. They would have been destroyed by the very person they loved most. And so Allah took the child, and in his place promised them another, a child who would bring them joy, strengthen their faith, and be closer to mercy. We never meet those parents. We never see their faces. We never hear their cries. But they are there in Khidr's words, a couple who loved their son, a couple whose faith was about to be tested by the child they cherished. And Allah removed the test before it arrived. The worst day of their lives was also the day Allah protected their faith. They could never have known that. And neither could Musa. That is the weight of this lesson. Mercy sometimes wears a mask that looks exactly like cruelty. As for the wall, it belonged to 2 orphan boys in the city, and beneath it was a treasure belonging to them. Their father had been a righteous man. So your Lord intended that they reach their maturity and extract their treasure as a mercy from your Lord. Beneath the crumbling wall lay a treasure, buried years ago by a man who was no longer alive, a righteous father who knew he would die before his sons could protect themselves. He could not guard them forever. He could not stand over them from the grave. So he buried their inheritance beneath a wall and trusted Allah to keep it safe. And Allah did. He sent a stranger, a man the father had never met, a man the orphans would never know, to rebuild the wall at the exact moment it was about to fall, so that the treasure would stay hidden, so that no thief would find it, so that when those boys grew into men, they would discover what their father had left for them. This is perhaps the most beautiful detail in the entire story. A dead man's righteousness reached forward in time to protect his children through a stranger he never knew existed. The father never knew Khidr would come. Khidr never knew the father, but Allah knew both. And he connected them across time, across death, across the walls of a hostile town. Your righteousness protects your children even after you are gone. A good parent's legacy is not just memory, it is divine protection that operates in ways no one can see. And then, Khidr's final words, the words that seal the entire story. I did not do it of my own accord. That is the interpretation of that about which you could not have patience. He was not acting on impulse. He was not making his own decisions. He was following orders from the same God who tells the sun to rise, the rain to fall, and the hearts of men to beat. Every act was commanded. Every consequence was planned. Every thread was woven by the same hand that shaped the universe. And Musa stood there, silent. The greatest prophet alive on earth at that moment, and he understood. He understood that his knowledge, vast as it was, had limits. He understood that his justice, noble as it was incomplete without the full picture. and he understood that the full picture belongs to no one except Allah. That is the interpretation of that which you could not have patience with. How many times in your life have you looked at something and said, "This is unfair"? A job you lost, a relationship that ended, a plan you worked on for months that fell apart overnight, a prayer you made with everything you had, and it seemed like it was never answered. You looked at the wreckage and you could not understand why. You asked the question every human being has asked since the beginning of time: if Allah is wise, if Allah is merciful, if Allah has a plan, then why does this hurt? The story of Musa and Khidr does not give you a specific answer. It does not tell you why that particular thing happened to you, but it gives you something better, a framework. It says you are Musa. You can only see what is in front of you. The boat looks damaged. The loss looks senseless. The wall looks like wasted effort. But there is a Khidr in your story too, except his name is Allah. And he sees what you cannot. The boat that was damaged saved a family from a tyrant. The child who was taken protected his parents' faith. The wall that was rebuilt preserved orphans' treasure for decades. Every act that seemed like cruelty was mercy, operating underneath, invisible, patient, exact. Perhaps you hate a thing and it is good for you, and perhaps you love a thing and it is bad for you. And Allah knows, while you know not, that ayah from Surah Al-Baqarah is not a Khidr verse directly, but it is the Khidr principle. The entire story condensed into one sentence. But there is a final layer to this story that changes everything. Musa was not punished for breaking his promise. He was not shamed. He was not expelled in disgrace. He was taught. Khidr explained everything. The failure was the lesson. Allah designed this entire journey knowing from the very beginning that Musa would fail, because the failure itself is what makes the story powerful. If Musa had stayed silent through all three acts, we would have no outbursts, no objections, no escalation. The story works because Musa reacted. His humanity is not a flaw, it is the engine of the lesson. His outrage at the boat, his horror at the boy, his frustration at the wall, those reactions are what make us feel. Those reactions are what connect us to a story that happened thousands of years ago. Musa's failure does not diminish him. It makes him the greatest teacher in this story, not Khidr. Because through his failure, we learn what we could never learn if he had succeeded, that the highest form of faith is not understanding. It is trusting the one who does. But the stories of the Quran do not end with one lesson. 3 civilizations received their prophets. 3 nations were given chance after chance, and 3 nations refused. The people of Hud, who mocked their prophet until a wind came, a wind that lasted 7 nights and 8 days, tearing everything apart. The people of Salih, who slaughtered the she-camel Allah had sent as a clear sign, and woke to an earthquake that left no one standing. And the people of Lut, whose transgressions were so severe that stones rained down from the sky. When Allah's patience ran out, no wall could protect them. No boat could save them. Their story is next. Stay tuned. See you in the next episode.